Well, our weekend review is looking at the situation with prices of power and all that sort of thing. Gas. Now, we get it that way. First of all, Kroger is you have a
yes, I have
thing.
It's a publicly announced thing that I have.
You announced it here once, and I went, wow, knew nothing about it.
Shareholding in Kroger, yeah. But that's because I believe passionately about doing certain things. And where I'd like to kick this discussion off on, and I hope that Ralph and I have some lively exchanges here, is that I don't think the whole debate has moved on the way it absolutely needs to. Because if you scroll back a few years, there seemed to be the them and us about climate change itself. That's history now. Everybody accepts that we're in this climate crisis, that we have to respond to it. Where there is a separation of views, and I'm not saying between myself and Ralph here, but in the public arena, it seems to me to be the difference between responsible transition and irresponsible transition. And I think the evidence is showing that if we're not careful, we are heading headlong into irresponsible transition, because we're seeing if you scroll back to the earlier mindset that we all had about, are we in a climate crisis? How do we feel about it? There was the instinctive reaction, goodness me, we must now start, quite rightly, we must start reducing fossil fuel usage, etc. Perfectly correct. But it was a knee-jerk reaction out with a clear plan as to where we were going, and a costed one, and we haven't got that. And I don't think the government are really fulfilling their duty and responsibility in laying out what the challenges are that we've got to overcome. Because there are three fundamental costs. One is ensuring that your energy delivery is out with fossil fuel burning. That's the first thing. The second thing is that because it's inevitable that we will migrate to major use of electricity as the delivery for energy, that our current infrastructure is completely inadequate for that purpose. And finally, there's the cost of home adaptation, insulation levels, conversion from gas and oil boilers to air source heat pumps, etc. And if you put those three costs together, you really do have a very major challenge. And what I object to is the fact that people are not yet addressing those issues. And they're saying, oh, well, let's remove gas and let's do this and that. What's actually happening is that there's a growing awareness that we have rushed our fences on transition fuel, which is gas. The UK government in the last few days has announced they're opening up 6 fields, oil and gas fields. For their part, the Irish are about to build 2 new power stations fired, using natural gas, because gas is a transition fuel. And we seem blind on the Isle of Man to that, or some people seem blind to it anyway. And we seem content, rather than recovering our own gas from the Isle of Man, we prefer, for some really obscure and strange reason, to pay exorbitant prices for imported gas. And there's a madness around it.
And much more than that. But your view is different, I think, I should say it easily.
I think, a lot of what Chris says there is completely right. Gas is a transition fuel. We're using gas now at the moment, and it is much, much cleaner to use gas than it is use coal or peat. I mean, you mentioned Ireland. I mean, they've still got peat
and coal
fire station, power stations. It's incredible. Not only are you taking a source off the top layer of the land, which has all that carbon stored in it, you reckon that ecological space, you're actually then burning it for electricity. So I think moving away from that to gas is a good step for them. We've got the gas infrastructure in place. Gas power station will still be working up until, I think, 2031. So
it needs to run beyond that.
Oh, I don't think it will, to be honest, because there's talk that the UK are going to put hydrogen in there, and once you get to that level of hydrogen, over 4% of hydrogen, then our Rose Power Station won't work. So, there's a lot of investment which will need to be done.
Yes, but and this is where we get to a really interesting point. I mean, if you look at the January 25th McKinsey report, which came out looking at what is the true cost of conversion, their argument is that it's 7% of GDP over the duration from 2022 through to 2050. Now, in the Isle of Man, that's £350 million a year for the next 25 years. That's in today's money, and that's a huge. We're not talking about that. It's all well and good Ralph saying, well, look, we have to close the power station because of hydrogen, etc. That's assuming that we haven't got our own gas, first of all, and a damn sight cheaper. What's happening is the general public, householders, are beginning now to pay the price of failed early policies because we overreacted, we knee-jerk reacted to climate change instead of coming out with a properly organised plan, which is difficult to do, but at least let's be honest about the degree of challenge that we've got.
What knee-jerk reaction have we done? We haven't done anything yet. There is nothing built. There is nothing in place.
The knee-jerk reaction.
There isn't a proper policy in place about what we're doing. We've got the current report, which shows a high and low way of going about reducing it in the future, but there's nothing been in place, and that's been the biggest crime. The biggest crime is that the Isle of Man government building control is still allowing houses to be built with very poor insulation. Insulation that's not good enough.
Okay, so
not good enough. That could be done, as you know. That was one of the things I was going to push for, and you know that. It has to be that we're building houses now that are fit for the future. They have to be fit for the future. They've got to be fit for the future, and they don't require central heating. And it's not about gas. It's about changing the way we live. We want to live in warmer, drier homes. We don't need central heating now. We can actually do it in a different way. We can have it so well insulated that the heat, a small amount of heat can be
I don't disagree with those principles.
I know, we agree on that.
Totally agree. What I feel very strongly about is the irresponsible transition or lack of plan. Because if it is true that we couldn't use the gas power station beyond 2030.
That's what General Electric have said, so
fine.
It's not my...
Well, we could continue to use it if we had our own gas, though, Ralph.
If you turned off the gas pipeline and actually used another form of gas.
Right. So we turn the power station off in 2030. 31, I beg your pardon. Did you say 2030?
It's 31, the hydrogen content up too high for it, but in 34, that's when the gas turbines come to the end of their life.
Fine, as things stand. So in that short period of time, do you know what the costing is to get our economy running the way it needs to run out with fossil fuels?
Well, the costing wants to come from experts and energy companies. This is where I think the misunderstanding is. Government certainly wants to have the infrastructure and own the infrastructure, the network,
which
to
degree is
deliver.
inadequate.
Yes, it is, but there are ways around that. You don't there's ways around it by having like smart meters, so you actually have electricity at different times. So you don't. So
now you see. Let me stop you there.
We're getting into the detail.
This whole thing of smart meters, right? The inevitable conclusion in the UK, as they understand it, is that having a smart meter installed means that the energy companies will suppress consumption at certain times because the energy company will know when the household is using electrical consumption and say, right, if you consume at breakfast time or at tea time or whatever, the price will go up. Ralph, that, with the greatest of respect, is just, it's a bit of a dodge, really. I mean, what we need to do... the idea...
Dodge for what?
No, what I'm saying is if you shut the gas power station down in 2031 or 2035, have you got a clear view in your mind, or has government rather, because it's we're no longer in there, have they got a clear idea of the cost to the Isle of Man to get the infrastructure up to standard and to get how many 40,000 houses is it up to standard in such a short period of time?
You'll never get 40,000 houses in such a short period of time, will you? There's 40,000 houses to actually do. I'm suggesting you start with the houses that aren't built yet and actually get those up to a standard that we want to.
So when
that
do you
should be done overnight, shouldn't it, Chris? Really, there's no reason why that.
Yes, but that's only a beginning. What you're saying is
that's the whole point. That's the whole point. It's the beginning, and then people start living with it, and it's not fear then.
But
you're not pumping fear into people.
You're putting a closure on the gas power station.
I'm not putting a closure.
No, you just said that's
General Electric.
Yeah, okay. So, in the meantime, how is that massive expenditure going to be dealt with to get everybody in a position where they don't need gas or oil-fired central heating, for example, just by way of example?
Yeah. So the trick is to actually get a consortium of people who do understand what to do and actually can deliver the vision, the future. That's where we should be.
Agreed. So should we not, therefore, be making sure, one way or the other, that until we've got that plan, we stop jumping at half-baked solutions, which is where we are now?
Nobody's jumping at anything. That's the problem. If we both agreed that we change building control overnight, that would be a great start, and it would send the right direction.
Hang on
we can then, as we both agreed as well, put a consortium together of experts to actually then come up with a policy for the Isle of Man that's going to work. Sorry, with a direction for the Isle of Man that's going to work. The government can then adopt that policy, and that's what we should be doing.
Fine. So in the meantime, you're of the view, let's challenge you here, because it's a debate in a way. You're of the view that we should deny ourselves access to reasonably priced gas from our own field, and number two, and you're an ex-Treasury guy, deny ourselves the opportunity of a very, very significant inflow of funds from that gas field, which is what the Treasury would enjoy, which would be sufficient to fund a responsible transition.
Yeah, you know what? If someone did have
against that,
no, I'm going to explain my position. If someone did have all those barrels of gas or pipelines of gas ready for the Isle of Man to use, you could then make a decision on whether to buy it or not. But what we shouldn't be doing is having any distraction or any thought from the taxpayer's point of view that if a private company wants to carry out a 3D seismic test, if a private company wants to go and start drilling, that's up to them. It's their money.
No, it's not.
It's their money.
No, hang on.
It should not be taxpayers, and it should not be a distraction, and it shouldn't be ahead of any other decisions or any other policies and direction that we should be going together.
So what you're saying is we haven't got you've said yourself, we have not yet got an understanding of the cost and the timescale of the transition. But what you're actually, and I agree with you that the recovery of gas is a private sector issue, but remember, it's the Isle of Man government that would issue the licence or otherwise. So if the Isle of Man government does not allow the licence, then that process can't go ahead. And the Isle of Man government and the taxpayer, because in the end, all tax recovered belongs to the taxpayer, we're shutting ourselves out. So we're actually, as things stand, it's possible that we'll deny ourselves the potential revenue into Treasury on the one hand, when we still don't know exactly what the massive cost of the outlay for the transition is going to be. Isn't that a form of madness?
No, it's not madness, Chris. What I think would be madness would be for an investor not to fully understand what the risks are of going for gas and what the chances are of getting a return on their money. That to me would be madness. Why you'd encourage other people to put more of their hard-earned money into a project that is very, very low risk of happening. That to me would be madness.
Low risk of happening, I don't understand.
Well, low risk of happening, like, can you actually raise the £30 million or whatever it's going to cost to get it?
Wait a minute. There's a confusion in that thinking. On the one hand, you're saying it's an independent operator's responsibility to make that investment. But on the other hand, you're making the mistake that a lot of people are doing, that somehow or other people who don't know the details of it are sitting in judgment as to whether that organisation can achieve it or not. The government's duty is to decide whether a licence should be issued. The independent operator's decision is to whether or not they're going to go forward with the investment. But what I'm trying to say is that on the one hand, there's a major cost coming down the road at a time when households are already now beginning to suffer with additional fuel costs, inflation, and the like, and that somehow or other, almost like in a form of magic action, we find the funds to invest in individual homes to get them up to standard, which we need to do, and invest in the infrastructure necessary for the future non-fossil fuels provision.
Right.
It's to my mind, it's all back to front and upside down and dangerous.
No. I think you mentioned the McKenzie report just a few minutes ago, and I think it's quite clear in that the finance is available now for these projects. And I think from the private sector is absolutely falling over themselves to get involved in renewable projects.
What do you consider?
What they don't want to do is actually start putting their money and shareholders' money into projects that are going to have a limited life. It's a bit like buying a ticket on a merry-go-round that's slowing down.
No, hang
it's
on
not
a second.
speeding up.
And investors...
Fossil fuels is on the way out. We owe it to the planet not to keep exploring.
Is that why the UK government are now opening up 6 new fields? Because they recognise that gas is a transition fuel. There's a conflict between the concept of gas being a transition fuel for some significant years on the Isle of Man and everywhere else, and the idea that you somehow magically shut it down in the early 30s and have, out of goodness knows where, found the funds. I mean, somebody's falling over themselves to put, I don't know who they are, to pay for air source heat pumps in individual houses to insulate houses up to the necessary level.
You are conflating two things.
I'm answering your point.
No, you're not. The private sector money is on the larger projects for renewable energy, the generation of renewable energy, and more importantly, the storage of that energy. Because once you can actually store it, you've then got that energy for when you need it. The great thing about fossil fuels is it's actually there, isn't it? You can turn it on and use it whenever you want. The downside with renewables is that it'll only generate when the wind's blowing.
You're epitomising exactly the problem that you're talking about. For example, storage. Mm-hmm. There's a long way to go before we've got renewables in a position where they are storable, sufficient to deliver even delivery. I mean, that's a fact.
That's energy.
No,
you store the energy that's created.
That's what I'm talking about. Storing the energy.
Yeah. So whether it's renewable or anything, it doesn't matter. It's how to store energy.
Storing energy for renewables has not yet been sufficiently dealt with for when this gas station, suppose a gas power station, is shut down, to provide level delivery to the Isle of Man.
I agree. It hasn't even started.
Exactly. Well,
it hasn't even started.
So,
and that's the fault of us in the last administration. We didn't actually get. And you and I were sat next to each other, and we could actually see the then Minister for DEFRA arguing with people. You know, it was difficult, wasn't it? We didn't go forward enough in that last administration. That was the problem.
All I would ask before any decisions are made, that the whole matter remains open, sufficient for options to be picked up so that the transition can become responsible. At the moment, it's a miasma of ideas and thoughts, but there's no clear plan, and it's not costed, and so we can't bumble on through to the closure of the gas power station here on the Isle of Man without knowing exactly what we're doing and the implications of it. And if it is as early as 31, 35, then I would put it to you, with the greatest respect, there's a massive problem ahead.
I agree with a lot of that, because there is a lot of confusion around at the moment. There hasn't enough work been done on an Isle of Man solution. We've got some scenarios that have been put forward that aren't really Isle of Man related, and we shouldn't really be supporting them. We need to do a lot more work on this. I totally agree with you. And we don't want to bumble in. We definitely do not want to bumble in for closure. Well, that's because we haven't started the real work on this yet, and we haven't given a clear enough indication of the direction of travel, and we could easily
And
do
the
that
cost.
by changing. Well, yes, the costing can. We all know what it costs for wind farms.
No, that's
you
the-
all know what
no.
it costs to actually store energy. All those costs are there, so it's quite easy where the will is there to put this together and know exactly how much it's going to cost and who's going to pay for it. Absolutely, who's going to pay for
Yeah,
it.
well, and before
And we
decisions
totally
are-
agree on that.
Fine, we'll close it on that then.
If you want to hear more about these discussions, by the way, the PAG guys are having a debate at the end of the month. I'm chairing it, so it's been quite interesting. It's passionate, and I really appreciate hearing both sides of that.
Well, I thought it was helpful for us to exercise. We struggled on occasions to find out where we disagreed.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, we're in exactly the same position, that you need responsible transition, and that we haven't got yet.
Okay. All right. In our next section, it's the last section. It's going to be about the budget, isn't it?
Well, it's just a
Budget.
I mean, next
budget we don't know about, although
next week is going to be an interesting debate because we'll be able to look back and
Okay.
see what was said. We don't know, but
well, join us for the last section of the weekend review.